Only Nixon could go to China, and only Joe Biden can hand out free crack pipes. What can I say, folks? Some nights the jokes just write themselves, and I spent the whole day terrified that someone was going to steal that one before I could get it down on the record. So yes, in case you haven't heard today's news, Joe Biden's HHS department, or as I like to call it, number 2 on the list of cabinet agencies that most need to be abolished, is spending $30 million, I think it's $30 million, on a pilot program that's intended to, in their words, reduce the harm from drug use and, drumroll please, you know what's coming, say it with me, advance racial equity. And I have to digress here briefly just to say, that's probably on the short list of the most shockingly racist things I've ever heard in my entire life. Our national government has announced, with a straight face and total apparent sincerity, that they're going to advance the cause of racial equity by giving crack pipes to black people? That sounds like it should be something from a sketch on Chappelle's show, honestly. Now, if you're a reasonable person in possession of your own faculties, your first question on hearing about this might be, how did such a law ever get through Congress? How come I never heard about it? Well, I'll tell you how. You know how when you read through the synopsis of whatever multi-trillion-dollar pork barrel monstrosity they're trying to ram through at any given time, whether it's a fake COVID relief bill or a fake infrastructure bill or whatever, there are always dozens of line items listed that have triflingly small price tags in the grand scheme of the entire bill, and the descriptions are always very vague and innocuous sounding. And this grant, I guarantee you, it originated as one of those line items in one of those bills. It would have looked something like $30 million to reduce drug harm in historically marginalized communities, or some mewling crap like that. From the description, nobody would have any reason to think that they're talking about handing out free Joe Biden crack pipes. Most times, even the members voting on the bill have only read the synopsis and not the actual text. Remember that time when Pelosi said we have to pass the bill to see what's in it? That is what she was talking about. So, all manner of stupid, nonsensical, abhorrent things thus become the law of the land. Things that would never be passed in a million years if their authors were honest and forthright about their contents. But this is a game the Democrats play, and they are extremely good at it. And the Republicans, dedicated henhouse guards that they are, most times they let them get away with pretty much whatever they want. So if you're a local government, and you want to apply for some of this grant money, then you have to abide by the terms of the endowment, which includes handing out shiny new Joe Biden crack pipes to anybody who wants one. And if you're still wondering what the thrust of the opening joke is, which I think I probably will use for the episode title, why the Nixon-China allegory is such an apt one, it's because this completes quite a personal journey for Joe Biden, all the way from being the primary author of the '94 crime bill, which they used to call the Biden crime bill, right up until punishing criminals became unfashionable in Democrat Party circles, to being today a president who hands out shiny new crack pipes. But you'll be happy to know the fake fact checkers, they're all over this one. They have already rated it as a mostly false claim. Why? Oh, because they're not just handing out crack pipes, they're also giving out heroin needles. Isn't that great, Jim Eagle? From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where it's always a good day to see your enemies driven before you and hear the lamentations of their women. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And back to the '94 crime bill, the Biden crime bill, if you will. The one everyone says is racist now because it resulted in the supposedly disproportionate incarceration of young black men. Because one of the cornerstones of what passes for leftist thought in the 21st century is the idea that any time there is a racial disparity with respect to some negative life outcome, the only possible explanation for it is that racist white men passed racist laws because they're racist, which, needless to say, is a spectacular spectacularly stupid way of looking at the world. Joe Biden was a senator for 7 terms, 42 years, and that 94 crime bill is the only piece of major legislation with which his name was ever commonly associated. It is such a wonderfully Joe Biden-esque bit of irony that he tries so hard now to disavow it, to apologize for it. He even conceded on the debate stage in 2020 that it was a racist law when Kamala Harris attacked him for it. But it's ironic because in a sane world, that 94 crime bill was the best, most useful thing Joe Biden has ever achieved in his 50 years in national government. At the time, he viewed it as the capstone achievement of his career. And it was. Why on earth should a legislator apologize for a law that took huge numbers of violent criminals off the streets and put them into the penitentiary where they damn well belong? People are all too quick to forget now what a scourge crack cocaine was in the late 80s and early 90s. This stuff was wrecking entire cities, causing all manner of violent criminality. So what happened? Well, people did what people do in democracies. They called up their elected representatives and said, I don't want my neighborhood to be a drug den and a shooting gallery run by gangs of armed thugs where innocent citizens have to live in fear for their lives on a daily basis. I want more cops on the streets. I want heavier sentences for drug crime. And if you don't deliver it, then I'll vote for your opponent, and maybe he will. Nowadays, if you say something like that, they just call you a white supremacist and send you to a woke diversity training class, but that's a separate discussion. There is nothing wrong, much less racist, about decent people, law-abiding citizens feeling themselves entitled to live in neighborhoods that are free of junkies and hobos and needles and poop and filth, because they damn well are entitled to that. Government has no more basic function than ensuring that normal, decent people are able to walk around the streets of their own hometown without being harassed or assaulted by crazed drug addicts and mental patients. But the conventional wisdom now, today, when everybody's either forgotten about how awful the crack epidemic was or they're just too young to remember, says the 94 crime bill was a racist law because it created penalties for crack cocaine that were steeper than the penalties for powdered cocaine. Even a lot of dumb moral cowards on the right just reflexively concede the correctness of this argument, even though no rationale is ever provided in support of it. And what is the rationale? Why do you suppose there was a disparity in the steepness of the penalties for crack cocaine compared to powdered cocaine? Well, could it be that crack cocaine was driving a nationwide epidemic of addiction and violent crime, while powdered cocaine was not? All things being equal, isn't that a more sensible explanation than a bunch of racist white men decided to write a racist law because they thought it would be fun to throw a bunch of black guys in prison? I mean, really? That's what we're going with? That's the conventional wisdom that's universally accepted on the left and the right alike, and you're not allowed to question it, lest ye be tarred and feathered in the public square and made to wear the scarlet letter R. Could it be that there's vastly less crime associated with powdered cocaine because powdered cocaine is a hell of a lot more expensive than crack, and thus tends to be used by a more economically upscale clientele? It seems pretty obvious that this is the truth of the matter, and it's got nothing whatsoever to do with race. If anything, it's a class disparity, because let's face it, every cocaine consumer in the entire world, with the possible exception of Admiral Hunter Biden, America's greatest naval hero, if they can afford powdered cocaine, they're not going to choose crack. And if there's any group of people who shouldn't need that explained to them, it's the U.S. Congress. But we still, I haven't yet touched on what is the most comically absurd aspect of the Joe Biden Crack Pipes for Racial Equity program. And what might that be, you ask? Well, how about the fact that it openly suggests that there's such a thing as a less harmful way in which to smoke fucking crack? Because look, I ain't no doctor, I ain't no scientist, I ain't got no fancy book learning, but I'm gonna go out on a limb here and posit that the only meaningful way of reducing the harm associated with smoking crack is by not smoking crack. So how exactly does smoking crack become less harmful if you use a brand new crack pipe with Joe Biden's face on it? And did that question even occur to anyone before they put out this public statement? Did HHS Secretary Javier Becerra actually sign off on this nonsense? Now, you may have forgotten that Javier Becerra is the HHS secretary, but don't feel bad because everybody else did too. It's astounding to consider that technically, Becerra is Tony Fauci and Francis Collins' boss. And in 2 years of the China virus pandemic, how many times have you seen Becerra's face or heard his voice? If the rumors are to be believed, Becerra is an even more ineffectual cabinet secretary than Mayor Pete is, though they each share in common the attribute of having absolutely no skills or experience that are in any way relevant to the post they currently occupy. And being more ineffectual than Mayor Pete is really quite the auspicious achievement, because that guy took 2 entire months off when he was trying to figure out how to make milk come out of his disgusting hairy man nipple. And we're all still pulling for you, buddy. Chest feeders for life. It's rumored that Becerra doesn't really do much of anything, which I suppose that's preferable to the alternative, since his prior experience consists of being a California state attorney general who spent most of his tenure in that office writing up frivolous lawsuits against the Trump administration and writing tweets about how bad the Orange Man is. So yeah, let's bring in that guy to run the nation's public health apparatus. I like the cut of his jib. If he hates Trump that much, I'm sure he can defeat the virus, right? It makes almost as much sense as hiring a guy to run the transportation department who couldn't manage to fix the potholes in South Bend, Indiana, which, technically speaking, is the number one most important job a mayor has. But Pete Buttigieg is not a major figure in national politics because he's good at anything or has ever performed well in any job. He's a major figure in national politics because he enjoys having sex with other men. And the fake news media were extremely desirous of having a gay male candidate in the 2020 Democratic field. So he is the guy they picked. That is the only reason you have ever heard of this young man. But I want to get back to the harm reduction model of crack cocaine consumption, if we could, because this is one of those cases where people really suffer from inhabiting intellectual echo chambers of their own creation so that they're never forced to step back and look at their own worldview from the 30,000-foot level, because if they did, they might see that, wow, this one thing I believe is totally irreconcilable with this other thing I believe. How did that happen? Now, we've talked before on this program at considerable length about how the public health authorities, really in all the countries of the Anglosphere to one extent or another, have been taken over by maniac tobacco controllers. And tobacco controllers are people who take a brute force social engineering approach to matters of public health, rather than the approach that was previously favored, which involves disseminating to the citizenry honest, dispassionate information and allowing grown men and women to make their own decisions for themselves. Now, the number one entry in the tobacco-controlled 10 Commandments is that you may not take a harm reduction approach. You're not even allowed to say the words harm reduction, because all tobacco products, nay, all nicotine products, are 100% bad and evil and harmful and addictive, and product makers are not even allowed to intimate that one type of tobacco product might be intrinsically less harmful than another tobacco product. Obviously, this type of policy doesn't concern itself with anything remotely resembling a concern for the scientific method or for a data-driven approach, because it is clearly, demonstrably, provably true that certain modes of tobacco consumption are wildly less harmful than cigarette smoking, and it's just as true that certain modes of non-tobacco nicotine consumption are wildly less harmful than consuming tobacco. But you are not allowed to say any of that. That's the whole reason why you're not allowed to call cigarettes lights and ultralights anymore. Because the geniuses in the ivory towers of big tobacco control decreed that if you call a cigarette light or ultralight, then you're making the claim that it's less harmful than a regular cigarette, and this is a thing that you mustn't do. And again, it matters not in the slightest whether it's true or not, because the people are just too damn stupid to be allowed to make their own choices about the products they consume. Just like they're too stupid to decide for themselves whether they get the Fauci ouchie, or whether they send their kids to school wearing a ridiculous secular burqa on their faces. But here's a good litmus test you can use to figure out if you might be a crazy person. Now, if somebody lighting up a cigarette 10 feet away from you causes you to go into paroxysms of horror, but you're totally unbothered by the same person blazing up a rock of crack in their Joe Biden crack pipe, you might be a crazy person. So on the one hand, you have the militant rejection of the harm reduction principle when it comes to cigarette smoking and all tobacco use more broadly, while on the other hand, the very same public health authorities are proposing in complete seriousness that smoking rocks of crack in a brand new Joe Biden crack pipe is somehow manifestly less harmful than smoking those same rocks of crack in an old, dirty, non-Joe Biden approved crack pipe. You really could not make this stuff up if you tried, and they seem totally bewildered and dismayed as to why they keep hemorrhaging credibility with the general public. Now, before we go tonight, I want to state for the record my firm belief that Justin Trudeau totally is not the bastard love child of Fidel Castro. I find these rumors scurrilous and absolutely disgusting. It is not Mr. Trudeau's fault that he looks exactly like Castro, while bearing no apparent resemblance to his actual father. And it's also not his fault that his parents had an open marriage and his mom was a rather legendary swinger who was known to have a fancy for Castro and who just so happened to have been in Havana exactly 9 months before his birth. So I think it's time to stop it with these unfounded accusations, because say whatever you want about Fidel Castro, but that dude never had any trouble locating his own testicles. So despite the creepily uncanny resemblance and all the dates and locations lining up perfectly, I refuse to believe Castro could have sired such a pathetically effeminate, girly man as Justin Trudeau. You may have seen a video clip that was making the rounds yesterday wherein a 79-year-old, 4'10" little old man was dragged out of his car by some Ottawa cops, roughed up, brutalized, handcuffed, hauled off to jail, and charged with criminal mischief. Did he break any actual laws? No. What was his offense? He honked his horn and gave a thumbs up to a trucker. It turns out there was an emergency ordinance passed the other day making it illegal to honk a car horn in the city of Ottawa for the next 10 days. And talk about treating the symptom instead of the disease, am I right? And this old man was not aware of it. He had driven downtown just because he was curious and wanted to go have a look. He never got out of his car, never planned on getting out of his car. So he drove around for a few minutes and was about to head home. He's waiting to make a turn. One of the Freedom Convoy truckers drives past, and he gives the guy a honk and a thumbs up. And these cops should be ashamed of themselves. For all the talk we hear about fictional police brutality, when the real thing happens, it should be called out, and the people who engage in it should be named, shamed, and lose their jobs. The correct law enforcement response to this little old man beeping his car horn is no response at all. Even if you've got a wild bug up your ass and you just can't let it go, it would have been really easy to just walk up and say, "Sir, I don't know if you're aware, but there's no honking allowed in the city right now." And if you're feeling like a real grade A asshole who's got something to prove and having a really shitty day, maybe you write the guy a ticket. But no, they went full Gestapo on this poor guy. 3 big cops, their faces conveniently hidden from view. They drag this poor guy out of his car, rough him up, manhandle the shit out of him, slap on the handcuffs, and according to his family, the last I read, he sustained multiple injuries and might have to wind up being hospitalized. If you can look at that video and not be utterly revolted by it, if you can look at that video and think, oh, sure, that's a proportional response to an 80-year-old man honking a car horn, then you are a freaking sociopath. And a psychopath. This is not the sort of thing that happens in a tolerant, liberal-minded society. This is the stuff of totalitarian police states. Nobody who claims to embrace enlightened Western values can be okay with things like this. You have to choose. You're either a person who tolerates evil or you're a person who opposes it. And this is straight up evil. Brutalizing and arresting senior citizens for made-up crimes is evil. And I'd love the chance to ask Justin Trudeau if he's okay with what was done to this man. Better yet, I'd like to see Justin Trudeau forced to speak to his family. to explain why his government thinks beating up old people is an acceptable means of combating the stupid China virus. But that would never happen because Justin Trudeau is a coward and a weakling, and the whole world is seeing it now. And we will leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I will see you Friday. God bless Kanakistan. God bless America. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.